have to say thank you to you all. After that last video about Jack the Ripper, I was not thinking I'd make another one, but your encouragement has been very positive, so it's a little bit more about why Edgar Degas creeps me out so much that I wonder if he could be Jack the Ripper. In particular, I want to talk about the Goulston Street Manifesto, which is an anti-Semitic post that was written on the wall. September 30th, 1888 was the double murder date. And before Catherine Eddowes' body was found, a portion of her bloody apron was located, and it was located just below a chalk inscription written on a wall, and it said, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." We do not have a photograph of the chalk writing because it was written in a Jewish neighborhood, obviously intending to blame the murders on Jewish people, and so the police at the time feared violence, and they took it down using a sponge. But before they did, they tried to copy it down as best they could. Antisemitism in both London and Paris was deeply troubling at the time. This was only a few years before the Dreyfuss Affair would break out, when Degas revealed himself to be so notoriously anti-Semitic, and both murders that night appeared to be anti-Semitically motivated. Elizabeth Stride was murdered right outside of a meeting of socialists that was attended almost primarily by Jewish men. When Elizabeth's body was found, it was found mostly by Jewish men, and the police report wrote that she was surrounded by Jews. So it could be that the murderer was attempting to frame Jewish men, or it could be that he thought she was prostituting herself to Jewish men. Also, there were two witnesses who thought they might have seen Jack the Ripper prior to Elizabeth Stride's murder. One of the men, last name Schwartz, said that the murderer had called out Lipsky to an associate. However, in police correspondence to each other, they pointed out that it may have been that the murderer was shouting a racial slur at the man, Mr. Schwartz, who simply did not understand it because he was new to the country. So yeah, anti-Semitism was a thing. Now, as for the suspicion of the Jews are the men who will not be blamed for nothing, first off, it's not really an English grammatical pattern. Double negatives don't exist in English. Further, the spelling of Jews is just definitely not English. A native French speaker might be more likely to spell it that way. Also, the manifesto was written in chalk, and Degas was a pastel artist. The concept of him having chalk with him at all times is pretty likely. On October 6th, the Times reported that the coroner, Dr. Phillips, had examined the knife found next to Elizabeth and had found it to be a common type of knife used by chandlers called a slicing knife. Now, it should be noted that a chandler is a candle maker. They work in wax. Mentioned in a previous video, was an artist of sculpture as well, but unlike most sculptors at the time, he did not work in bronze or clay. He worked in wax. So the odds that he would have wax cutting knives also seems very likely. Now, prior to erasing the Goulston Street Manifesto, the police attempted to make a copy of it on paper. This was not a photograph, it was not a perfect rendition, it was an police officer's version of another person's handwriting, so it was not scientific nor an exact copy, but they definitely tried to mimic the handwriting. So let's take a look at it. For the most part, I think it's fairly generic handwriting, except for the B right here. That to me looks fairly distinctive, so I tried to find some B's in Degas' notebooks. That kind of looks like a B, and it's similar. There's definitely a B with a backline, gap, and then a gap between the curl of the B in the front and the second letter in the word. I think this is the B that most closely resembles the B in the Goulston Street Manifesto, personally. I'm not a handwriting expert for like 2 minutes through what I have, so please do not consider this to be exhaustive. But still. So I'm not alone here. That's creepy coincidence, right? And unfortunately, I still haven't covered it all. There's so much more.